I need to read the transcript file to understand the original story structure before writing. The transcript is fully read. Now I'll write the new story. I spent 23 days in a rehabilitation center after my stroke, and not one person from my family called to ask if I could walk again. Let me back up. My name is Cora. I'm 54 years old. I live alone in a small house in Columbus, Ohio, and until about 8 months ago, I genuinely believed that my family, despite everything, despite all the years of small cuts and quiet dismissals, would show up if things got truly serious. That is the story I told myself. That is the story I stopped telling myself in a hospital bed in March, somewhere around day 11, when I finally let myself count the empty chairs and understand what they meant. The morning it happened was ordinary in every way that ordinary can be. A Wednesday, I was getting ready for work, standing in my bathroom putting on my earrings, and then I was on the tile floor, and I couldn't feel my right side. I knew what it was before the paramedics confirmed it. My mother had a minor stroke at 67. I'd read everything afterward because that's what I do. I research things. I prepare. I just never thought I'd be using that research to understand what was happening to my own body at 54. I called 911 from the floor. I remember that very clearly. What I remember less clearly is the next few hours, which is apparently normal, the brain doing its own private housekeeping during the crisis, filing certain things in unreachable drawers. What I remember is waking up in the ICU with the left side of my face feeling strange and a woman in scrubs telling me I was lucky, that I'd caught it fast, that the damage was significant but survivable. Survivable, I turned that word over in my head for a long time. I called my daughter Iris from the hospital room, while my words were still slightly off, still rearranging themselves before they could reach my mouth, which was one of the more terrifying experiences of my life. Iris is 29. We'd had our difficulties over the years, the way mothers and daughters do, but I thought we were past the worst of it. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened as clearly as I could, which took longer than it should have. She said, "Oh my God, Mom. Okay, let me think." And then she said she'd have to figure out her schedule because Derek, that's her husband, had a thing on the weekend. A thing. I didn't say anything to that. I think I just said okay, that was fine, I'd keep her updated. Because that's what you do when someone says something so wrong your brain refuses to fully process it in real time. You just keep going. You deal with the wrongness later, when you have more capacity for it. I texted my brother Nolan. He and I have always been complicated. The kind of siblings who love each other in theory and disappoint each other in practice. But I thought a stroke would cut through the complication. He replied 4 hours later. That sounds really scary. Hope the doctors are taking good care of you. And then, below that, after some kind of mental pivot I could actually feel through the screen. Hey, while I have you, did you end up deciding what you're doing with Dad's watch? Our father had been gone for 3 years. The watch had been a point of ongoing dispute. My brother had chosen a stroke hospitalization to follow up on it. My mother, Bev, and I love my mother. Or I loved who I thought she was, which I'm beginning to understand are sometimes different things. Bev called once. The day I was admitted. She said, "Cora, they're saying you had a stroke?" As if she was waiting for me to correct the record. As if I might say, "No, Mom. It's fine, wrong hospital, that wasn't me." I told her yes. She said that was just terrible news and that she was going to say a prayer for me and that I should rest and not try to do too much. Rest. I was in the ICU. Rest was not optional. Then she mentioned she had her water aerobics class in the morning and that she'd probably feel better about the situation once she'd talked to God about it. She did not come. Not that week. Not the week I was transferred to the rehabilitation center for intensive physical and occupational therapy, where I had to relearn how to write my own name, how to button my shirt, how to walk in a straight line, without listing to the right like a ship taking on water. 23 days. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 23 days of waking up every morning in a place that smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's fear, working my body harder than I had in decades, just to reclaim things I'd done without thinking since childhood. 23 days of a physical therapist named Mr. Okonkwo, who believed in me with this quiet, relentless professionalism that sometimes made me want to cry just from gratitude, because professional kindness from a stranger was more than I was getting from my actual blood. 23 days of Iris texting sporadically. She sent a get well soon card on day 6. A physical card, which I know sounds like I should appreciate, and I suppose I do. But there is something uniquely hollow about opening a Hallmark card when what you needed was a person. She asked on day 8 how the therapy was going. I told her honestly that it was hard, that I was frightened, that some days my right hand felt like it belonged to someone else, and she responded with a heart emoji. A heart emoji to, "I'm frightened." Nolan texted 3 times in 23 days. Once to follow up on the watch, once to say he hoped things were going well, once to forward me a link to an article about stroke recovery he'd seen on Facebook, with no message attached, just the link, like he'd clicked share and aimed it at me and called that support. Bev called twice more. Brief calls, she described each one later, I would discover, as checking in regularly. When I mentioned in our second call that I was struggling with depression, which is extremely common post-stroke and which my doctors were monitoring closely, she told me to try not to think negative thoughts. That attitude was so important for healing. I stopped calling her after that. What I had instead, in those 23 days, was a woman named Pat in the room next to mine, 62 years old, recovering from hip replacement surgery, whose sister and 2 friends took turns being there every single afternoon. Pat would wave at me through the open doorway sometimes, and once she sent her sister over with a magazine and a chocolate bar because, she said, Pat had noticed I didn't seem to get many visitors, and she wanted me to have something nice. A woman I'd never spoken to before sent someone to bring me chocolate because she'd noticed I was alone. A stranger's kindness is a beautiful thing. But it also holds up a very specific mirror. I was discharged on a gray Friday morning in early April. My friend from work, Ruth Ann, drove me home because I'd asked her, because there was no one else I could ask, without feeling like I was imposing on someone who'd made clear repeatedly that showing up required too much rearranging. Ruth Ann brought me soup. She helped me set up my shower chair. She stayed for 2 hours just to make sure I was settled. And then she said, "Call me if you need anything." And she meant it. I knew she meant it, 'cause she picked up every single time I called in the weeks that followed. I spent the first week home doing the quiet, painstaking work of rebuilding my life in increments. Occupational therapy twice a week. Speech therapy once a week. Naps every afternoon because my brain was still in some kind of intensive repair mode and fatigue hit like a wall you didn't see coming. I answered Iris's occasional texts. I gave brief responses to Nolan's even more occasional ones. I said the things you say when you're not yet ready to say the real things, when you're still in the phase of just getting through each day, and not yet in the phase of reckoning. The reckoning came on a Saturday. 6 weeks after I came home. 6 weeks during which not one member of my immediate family had offered to drive me to an appointment, bring me a meal, or spend more than 3 minutes of actual telephone time asking about my recovery. 6 weeks of being politely, seamlessly, efficiently managed from a distance. I was sitting on my couch in the afternoon, the particular kind of tired that follows weeks of harder work than anyone who hasn't done it can fully understand, and my phone buzzed with a text from Iris. "Hi Mom, hope recovery is still going well. So we have some big news. Derek and I are planning a vow renewal for our 10-year anniversary this summer. We found this amazing venue in Asheville and we're so excited. The whole package is coming out to around $22,000 and we're trying to put it together. We were wondering if you might be able to contribute maybe $8,000? We'd love for you to be part of making it special. Family makes these moments, right?" I read it twice. Then I put the phone down on the cushion next to me and looked out my window at the bare spring yard for probably 3 minutes without moving. $8,000. For a vow renewal, from a woman who had not visited her mother once during 23 days of stroke rehabilitation. Who had sent a Hallmark card and a heart emoji. Who had not once, asked whether I could button my own shirts yet. Whether I was scared about the long-term implications, whether the depression I'd mentioned had gotten better or worse. But she'd like me to be part of making their anniversary special. I thought about the right response for a long time. I thought about writing back everything. Laying out every day, every unreturned call, every emoji sent where a person should have been. I started drafting that message in my head, with the kind of terrible clarity that comes from weeks of quiet, and an enormous amount of processed pain. But I kept stopping, because something felt off about it. Not unfair, Just off. Giving Iris a detailed accounting of her failures felt like handing her a roadmap to defend against them, and I was tired, genuinely tired, of using my energy to educate people about basic human decency. They'd had 23 days to understand what showing up meant. 6 weeks more to course correct. They'd had every opportunity, so I opened my banking app. I transferred exactly $1 to Iris through Venmo with the note. Congratulations. Enjoy Asheville. Then I put my phone on silent, went to bed and slept for 9 hours, which was the best sleep I'd had since before my stroke. I woke up to a situation. 22 notifications, 14 from Iris, several from Derek, my son-in-law, who in the entire 6 months of my stroke recovery had texted me exactly once to say thinking of you. Apparently a $1 Venmo unlocked something in Derek's communication capabilities. There were 3 texts from Nolan. 3 texts in a single morning from someone who had averaged 1 per week during my hospitalization. And at the very bottom, 1 from Bev, who had called once during my ICU stay and twice during my 23 days of rehabilitation. I read them all before I responded to any of them. Iris's messages went through several phases. The first was confusion, then hurt, then a particular kind of injured dignity that I recognized immediately because I'd spent my whole life on the receiving end of it. I can't believe you would do that. It was supposed to be a special moment and you just what? Made a joke? This is embarrassing, Mom. Derek's parents are already contributing and now this? The last one said simply, you could have just said no. That last one sat with me. She was right. I could have just said no. But no was something Iris had been able to say to me for 23 days. Without once explaining herself. Or feeling the weight of what she was withholding. So I thought it was fair that no looked different when it came from me. Nolan's texts asked what was going on, and whether I was feeling all right, which would have been touching if he hadn't waited, until Iris apparently called him to check on me before developing any interest in my emotional state. Derek wanted me to know that this was really hurtful to Iris at an already stressful time. I waited 2 days before calling Iris back. I wanted the air in the room to settle into something I could actually breathe, before I tried to have a real conversation. When I called, she picked up immediately, which told me she'd been waiting. Mom. Her voice was tight in the way it gets when she's feeling wronged. What was that about? I want to ask you something first, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The speech therapy had done good things for me. Do you know how many days I spent in the rehabilitation center after my stroke? A small silence. I mean, I know it was a few weeks, 23 days. Okay. Can you tell me one day during those 23 days when you came to see me? The silence this time was longer. Mom, it's a long drive and Derek had. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes, Iris. I know because I looked it up in the first week when I was hoping someone might come. How many times did you call me during those 23 days? I texted. I sent a card. How many times did you call? She didn't answer. I went through something genuinely frightening. The doctors told me my right side might not recover fully. I'm still not sure it fully has. I spent 23 days doing the hardest physical work of my adult life, alone, while a woman in the room next to me had her sister there every single afternoon. A stranger in that building sent me chocolate, because she could see no one was visiting. And 6 weeks after I came home, still in therapy twice a week, still dealing with the aftermath, you texted me to ask for $8,000 for a party. It's not a party. It's a vow renewal. Iris. I said her name quietly. Not angrily. Just with the full weight of everything it was carrying right now. I gave you exactly the level of financial support that matched the level of presence you gave me when I needed you, she cried then. I hadn't expected that, and I want to be honest that it hurt to hear it. It's not a pleasant thing to make your child cry even when you know you're right. Even when the crying is coming from a place of something finally landing that should have landed much sooner. I didn't hang up. I sat with it. After a while she said, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I thought you were okay. I thought the doctors had it handled. Did you ask? Did you ever ask if I was okay? Or did you just assume I was so you wouldn't have to find out otherwise? Another long silence. I don't know, she said finally. And that was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. I told her I wasn't looking for an apology that day. I wasn't ready for one, and she wasn't ready to give one that meant anything yet. I told her I just needed her to understand that things between us were going to be different. Not gone maybe, but different. That I was no longer going to arrange my expectations around her convenience. That I would be there for her in the ways I was actually able to be there. But that I was done being an unconditional resource for a relationship where the conditions had clearly always existed. They'd just been mine to absorb and never hers. She didn't say much to that. I don't think she had the language for it yet. What happened after, I found out mostly through Relearned and through my cousin Penny, who lives 2 streets over and who had blessedly been one of the few people who showed up to see me in the rehabilitation center. Twice. With decaf coffee and old episodes of a home renovation show we both liked on her iPad. Bev apparently called Iris the day after our conversation and, from what Penny described, the family group thread. A thread I'd been quietly removed from 2 years ago during a disagreement about Thanksgiving. Was briefly occupied with whether I had become difficult since the stroke, which I understand is one of the ways families process the discomfort of being confronted with what they actually did. Nolan apparently felt bad enough to call me directly a week after the Venmo incident. He did not apologize for the hospitalization absence, but he did not bring up the watch, which I am choosing to regard as growth. What I didn't find out until later. Much later, maybe 2 months after the Venmo, through Penny again, who had been debating whether to tell me. Was something that changed the entire shape of what I thought I understood. Penny had run into Bev at the grocery store. And Bev had mentioned, in the particular offhand way she mentions things she doesn't realize are revealing, that she'd told the extended family during my hospitalization, that I had specifically asked to handle my recovery privately. That I had said I found visitors overwhelming and that I needed space to focus on therapy. I stared at Penny in her kitchen for a long moment. She said that? Penny pressed her lips together. She told me the same thing, Cora. In March, when I asked if you'd be okay with me visiting, I sat back in my chair. I had never said that, not to Bev, not to anyone. What I had said to Bev in our second phone call was that I was having a hard time and that it would mean everything to have someone there with me. I had said those exact words. I remembered them precisely because I hated saying them. I hated the vulnerability of them. The rawness of having to ask out loud for something that I felt should not have required asking. She had taken what I asked for and turned it into its opposite. She had told people I wanted to be alone, so that nobody would ask why she wasn't there. So that my loneliness would be attributed to my own preferences, rather than to her choices. She'd made my abandonment look like my design. I thought about that for a long time. Several nights actually. Lying in the dark with the particular kind of wakefulness that comes not from anxiety but from the slow, thorough work of fully understanding something you'd only half understood before. The difference between people who fail you through weakness, through ordinary cowardice and self-absorption, and people who actively construct a version of events that protects them from accountability. The first kind can sometimes, given enough time and honesty, find their way back to you. The second kind requires you to do something harder. I called Penny the following week and asked if she'd be willing to do something for me. The extended family had a group chat. A robust one, the kind that's been going for years and covers everything from birthday wishes to forwarded chain messages about scam alerts. I wasn't in it. I asked Penny to send one message on my behalf. Just one. She was reluctant because Penny is not a person who likes conflict, but I told her she didn't have to make any arguments or take any sides. She just had to share one document. My rehabilitation center discharge summary. 2 dates of admission and discharge clearly listed, length of stay noted, recovery goals and outcomes documented, and below the image 1 sentence from me. I've recently learned some of you were told I'd asked not to have visitors during my stay. That wasn't true. I asked for support every day I was there. I just wanted the people who care about me to have accurate information. Penny sent it at 9 in the morning. By noon she told me the chat had more activity than it had had in months. I didn't ask for any of it to be shared back to me in detail. I didn't need to watch it unfold. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere. It couldn't be quietly managed. What I know, from Penny's careful and somewhat reluctant updates, is that several cousins who'd been on the periphery of the family's social engagements, happy to plan weekend get-togethers with Bev and Nolan, Had questions afterward that nobody had easy answers to. What I know is that Bev apparently explained to Iris that she'd done it for Iris's sake. That she hadn't wanted the wedding planning energy disrupted by everyone worrying about me. Which was an explanation, I suppose, but not a defense. What I know is that the vow renewal in Asheville happened, scaled back considerably from the original vision. I heard this from Ruth Ann, who heard it from someone in her book club who vaguely knew Derek's family. The $22,000 venue apparently became something much smaller and closer to home, partly because the enthusiastic family contributions Iris had been expecting did not entirely materialize. Once the full picture of the preceding months came into focus for people who'd been handed an incomplete version, I want to be clear. I did not set out to ruin anything. I set out to stop absorbing the cost of being erased, which is a different thing. If the truth made certain plans more complicated, that's not something I did to them. That's simply what the truth costs when it's been kept from people who deserve to have it. It's been 8 months now. I haven't spoken to Bev since the document went to the group chat. She sent one text 3 weeks after, which said she was disappointed, and that she hoped I'd find it in my heart to think about what family means before I made any permanent decisions. I read it once and did not respond because I had spent 23 days in a rehabilitation center thinking about exactly what family means, and I felt I'd earned my conclusions. Iris and I are in something more fragile now. Not over, but changed. We spoke last month for the first time since the phone call she initiated. She didn't exactly apologize. Not fully. Not in the clean way that actually closes the wound. But she said she'd been thinking about what I'd said. That she hadn't realized how serious things had been, and that she understood if she wasn't my favorite person right now. I told her I appreciated that. And I meant it. And I told her that understanding isn't the same as repair, but that it was where repair has to start. We'll see. What I have, that I didn't have before any of this, is a clearer accounting of who I actually am to the people in my life, versus who I'd believed I was through the story I'd told myself for decades. Those are not always the same thing, and the gap between them is where the quiet damage lives. What I have is Ruth Ann, who showed up to drive me home from a hospital because she could see I needed someone and didn't wait to be asked twice. What I have is Penny, who visited with bad coffee and good television, and who struggled to tell me an uncomfortable truth because she loves me more than she loves comfort. What I have is Mr. Okonkwo, who doesn't know he's become something like a touchstone for me, a reminder that showing up fully for someone, even professionally, even in a rehabilitation gym that smells like antiseptic and effort, is one of the most human things a person can do. What I have is my right side, which is about 90% back, which the doctors say is better than expected. And what I have is the knowledge, hard-bought and permanent, that the people who show up when you're scared and broken and inconvenient, those are your family. The rest are just relatives. If you've ever had to learn the hard way what the difference feels like, you already know exactly what that dollar meant. And you already know it wasn't really about the money at all.